Welcome to TruthStream. Tonight we are here with Daryl James. I'm just going to read a little bit about Daryl. He is a former U.S. Navy Secret Space Program survivor, and we'll go more into his website, but DarylDJames.com. You know, we reached out to you last week. We are stoked you said yes. We saw, you speaking at an event. And I won't go into too much about what that is, but wow, what a story you have. Daryl, please explain a little bit about your background to the viewers, and thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate you being here.
Great to have you here, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Well, I joined the Navy in '99, and then I was in battalion, NMCB-7, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion. And then after that, I was in Iraq. I went to the Middle East. And then after that, I went to JMF. It was JMF RAF St. Morgan, Joint Maritime Force, Royal Air Force St. Morgan in Newquay, England. And this was in 2003. And got picked up. And it was just kind of normal. And then, but it was weird because like the first Monday I was there, they said they need you to escort some civilian workers in the underground base. And I worked in the garage. I didn't work in the underground base. I worked in the garage like across the way from the underground base. So I met these guys. They were from Siemens, the corporation Siemens, and they walked through. There was a metal detector. It looked like when you first walked into the underground base. And one guy said, "I'm not walking through that bloody thing." So he walked around it. So I thought, well, I don't want to walk through it either. So I went to go around it, but there was this English guard, who said, "No, you go through." So I thought, well, it's just a metal detector. You know, like at an airport, it just looked like a rectangle,
Sure.
wall on either side, wall on the top. Had like a little ramp. You had to walk over that had the black and yellow, like diagonal caution tape so you wouldn't trip over it. So I just walked through it, and I watched them pick the pump or something like that, and I walked them back. And then I had they call it balls to 4 in the military, which is like 0-100, 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. And I went to the quarterdeck, and I saw the guy, Michael Aquino, who started like the Temple of Set. He's a colonel in the Army. And I saw him on Oprah when I was a kid, so that's how I recognized him. He's got like
the unique.
Yeah, he's got like the curled up eyebrows. He like turns them in the horns, like curls them up. And he was reading papers on the quarterdeck desk, and I said hi to him, and that was it. And I didn't really talk to him that long. And then next Friday, I had another balls of 4, which isn't really common. I kept on getting balls of 4s on Fridays. And there was a petty officer watch, a first class petty officer. He was like a heavy set blonde guy with a blonde mustache, blue eyes. And he just pointed at the computer screen. He said, "What do you think about that?" And I was just sitting down. He said, "What do you think about that?" And it just looked like a picture of like a black and white, like gray, like your stereotypical gray, like looking up like at a camera in a room. And I said, "Wait till you get that off the internet." And he said, "Look, and next to the door that you had to walk through to go into the underground base, there was like this big window on the wall that had like a room behind it. And it was like 6 inches to the ceiling and like 6 inches to the floor. And there was like this little like gray, like what you think of a gray standing behind this window. But it was more like a khaki kind of brown, like a light brown. And it had like a fold of skin from a tear duct like to its cheekbone. And he said, "Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Does it mind if I look at it?" I said, "No." And it walked through the door, and it had like these really long fingers when I got to see it. And it was just like walking almost very robotic, and it kind of stopped real abrupt. And it had like a pistol in its hand. I thought it was a gun, and I just came back from Iraq, like a little pistol. And I kept on saying, "Gun, gun, gun, gun." And it kept on coming towards me. And then I stood up and I pointed at it and I said, "A gun." And they all said, "It's not a gun." And it showed it to me. It like put its hand out, showed it to me. And I don't know what it was. I thought maybe it was those syringes from Star Trek. Like I was trying to make sense out of this. Like maybe it's going to inject me with something. Because I knew right away this was like what you see like on the cover of books and stuff. This is it. And it turned out it was a little drill. It would look like brushed aluminum, like polished aluminum. And there was a little, there was like a junky government issue Dell computer on the ground. And it took it apart like a machine. It was just one after another. The screws went to the back, took it. It was catching the screws. The other hand, it was doing it. But as fast as you could do it. Didn't have to line it up or anything like that. It was just every time it hit the screw perfect. And it slid off the top, popped out 2 gigs of RAM. There were already 2 more waiting for it on top of the table. It grabbed 2 more, slid them in, And then it kind of did like a motion like that, and it kind of was able to just set the screws back in between his fingers every time, and it just put it together almost just as quick as it took it apart. And it stood there and looked at me, and I got kind of bored with it, and it went away. And I was like, "Wow, that's weird." And the guy said, "You think you can work around something like that?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know why not." I walked away. The guard walked behind him. They went to the underground base, and he said, "You're smart." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, really smart." And I said, "Well, how smart?" I said, like, 140, 150 IQ. And he said, "More like 190, 195. And I said, "Well, how could you tell that?" And he said, "Well, you see that machine you walk through in the underground base, the thing I thought was a metal detector." I said, "Yeah." He said that can detect anything, clots in your body, whether or not you smoke or you drink, all that stuff. It could detect everything. He asked me if I had any hobbies. I said, "I used to play classical guitar." And he said, "Well, they're really like that." And I said, "Who's they?" And he kept on saying they. And he's like, "Well, there's Germans up there." And I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "On the moon and past the moon, Mars, things like that. There's Germans up there." And I said, "Like from Germany?" And he's like, "Well, they're mostly from like the 30s and 40s, but yeah, the Germans." And he was talking about that, and I don't know, it was just a really weird experience. And before this, I forgot to say, oh yeah, one time the guys were talking in the barracks about we were playing Halo, and we were waiting for the next game, and they were talking about hey, did you see that reptile today? And I didn't know what they were talking about. I was just waiting for the next game, and they said, "Yeah, he was big." And I was kind of thinking, like, I don't know, maybe there's like, I knew it was an underground base. I was thinking maybe there's, I don't know, monitor lizards or something that live like caverns underground and walking around. And he's like, "Yeah," and he talked funny too. And I said, "What?" Like, I stopped and I said, "What are you guys talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, there's," and I said, "Oh, yeah, right, you're new here. There's reptiles that live underground and they're big and they talk to you." And I said, "Well, they walk around on all fours and just talk to you?" And no, they walk upright like us on 2 feet. And I really found it hard to believe, and I thought they were just messing with me because I was like the new guy, and I
Well,
didn't really know.
sure.
Yeah, I didn't know what to think. And but yeah, I mean that happened, and then the next Monday, the executive officer came. This was after I saw the gray and I saw all the stuff, and it told me about the high IQ and stuff like that. And I saw the executive officer, and found out later his first name is Robert, and he's the second in command of the U.S. Navy side, anyways. And he said, hey, he went to the garage and directly met me, which doesn't really happen. It's like usually they'll call you to their office, but they don't come to you. And he came directly to where I work, and he started talking to me. We walked away from the garage, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and he started just asking me things. He said, "Well, how does it feel to be have 195 IQ?" And I said, well, pretty good. But the guy at the quarterdeck told me I was only the second smartest, but he wouldn't tell me. But then there was another guy named Orlando that worked on the base, and he came up to me right away, and he was like, "Hey, what did you think about, long spindly fingers, big black eyes, kind of creepy looking?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, it's weird." He's like, "Hey, did you know who the smartest guy on base is?" It was a small base, so everybody was, everybody knew each other's business. And I said, "No." And he said, "It's the XO. He's the smartest guy on base." So when this guy Robert told me that, I said, he said, "How does it feel to be, have 195 IQ?" And I said, "Well, I said this close to 200." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well," I said, "Well, you know, because you're the smartest. You're the only one here smarter than me." And he said, "Oh, who told you?" And I was like, "Oh, I accidentally like stitched on the guy on purpose." And I eventually told him, and I was like, "Well, everybody knows." I was like, everybody was telling me because everybody was coming up to me the next day. And I was like, "Yeah, you have 195 IQ?" And I said, "I guess so." Like, I really didn't. I never took a test or anything. And, I remember the guy at the quarterdeck who first was showing me all the stuff, the gray and everything, the little brown drone is what they call him.
How tall was this roughly?
Probably about 3 feet, I want to say 3.5 feet, maybe. Yeah, 3.5.
Kind of like a dwarf type of person.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was sitting down, so it was just, it wasn't eye level or anything, but I had to look down a little bit, and it was
Right.
And he told me that I lost my train of thought. Well, he also told me that he was one of the guys on base that always won the PRT test, which is like the physical readiness test. And this guy was only 18, but he says, "I'm 35. He said, "Don't tell him." He said, "That's why I grow the blonde mustache, so he doesn't know." It's like a disguise. And I was like, what? And he's like, so that whole thing about if two people meet each other from two different time periods, the universe won't explode, I guess. But yeah, he told me, he was like, yeah, I volunteered for the secret space program, but that guy doesn't know. He's like, the younger me doesn't know, so don't tell him. He's like, I've already come back. You know,
Just your typical show.
This is already one of my favorite interviews. I just gotta let you know.
This is great.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Go ahead.
But yeah, it was really bizarre. And well, I was talking to the XO, and he said, you know, he asked me, he said, why are you a CB? I was construction battalions. And I said, well, I have a marijuana paraphernalia charge. So all I could do was, you know, construction or be a cook. So I couldn't really do anything else in the Navy. And that last guy, I'm sorry, that is what I was going to say before. The guy at the quarterdeck, the first class petty officer, he said, were you homeschooled? He asked me that. And I said, no. He said, well, I guess you just fell through the cracks because of my scores. And it sounds like almost like maybe when they do these IQ scores for kids, maybe they get recruited into like a secret space program. They don't know it. They look for people when they're young, I guess, to try to recruit them. That's what it felt like to me, because he said, I guess you just slipped through the cracks. They didn't find you. And so, yeah, I'm talking to the XO now, and he's telling me all this stuff. And he said, if you volunteer for this program, I guarantee you'll make commander and you'll make pilot of a 4-kilometer long starship. And he told me it looked similar to the Battlestar Galactica ships. And yeah, and I was just, what? Like, I was just talking to this guy, and he was telling me this stuff. And it was really hard to believe. And it was just very matter of fact. And he told me about the 20-year and back. He said, you volunteer, we'll put you in the program, you do 20 years in the program, we'll send you back in time 20 years, age regress you 20 years, wipe your memory, and you'll just wake up in bed like nothing happened. And I said I could believe, you know, in time travel, and I could believe in, you know, mind wipes, but I really found age regression hard to believe. And he said, well, after what you just saw, you find that hard to believe. And I said, well, touche, sir, but yes. And he said, well, it's all true. Like, he really wasn't concerned in telling me anything further. And when I walked through that machine, like I said, it told me if I had any clots. It told me at the time I smoked. Remember the first class petty officer? He's like, well, you smoke. And he's like, we don't have any clots. That's because you drink. Because I drank a lot back then. And I said, when I was a young kid, I told the XO, I said, my father died of something called a widowmaker, which is like a heart attack where you get no warning or anything like that. I said, well, we had a machine like that. We could have found, you know, the clot that was in his heart, and it would have saved his life. I said, why isn't this technology to the general public? And he started talking about, you know, population control. We can't do things like that. I said, well, there's got to be like a side that wants to bring this to the public. And he said, you mean like a traitor? And I said, well, no, sir. I said, you know, there's got to be a side that wants to bring this, you know, to the general public side. And he said, well, there is. I said, well, if you get me to that side, I'll volunteer for the program. And I shook his hand, saluted him. And as he was walking away, he says, one more thing, Mr. James. He said, there's a reptile's going to escort you, and he's big. And I really didn't know like what he was talking about. I mean, I remember the other guys told me this stuff, but I really didn't process. I saw the little thing, but you know, I didn't have a computer. I didn't know anything about ETs. I didn't know any of this stuff.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Wait,
yeah, and it was. And the whole time I was kind of in shock. Yeah.
This is all in one afternoon?
Well, I mean, the thing with the drone, that was the Friday before. This was Monday, the first day of work, you know, the following week. And he immediately like came to my, you know, workstation and asked me if I'd volunteer for the program.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And
so now you're about to be escorted by a reptile down the hall or whatever.
I'd be drinking and smoking too.
Wow.
Well, I guess the guys, like, I think that the command wanted them to kind of give me little tidbits here and there, so it would be such a shock to me. Sure. So they're kind of like telling me stuff. The guys who actually worked in the underground base, they're telling me. I think the command was telling them like, "Hey, let them know a little bit here and there." there was this guy, and we were playing Halo again, and he was like going out of the blue. He just said all of a sudden, he's like, "Yeah, man, you know," because everybody knew I had this high score. And I was like, "Yeah, I was going to be a pilot." I was like, and I was asking other guys. I was like, "Did they ask?" I knew this guy named David, and I said, "You know, did they ask you to join the program?" He said, "Yeah." He's like, "I didn't want to do it." He's like, "No." I said, "No." I said, "Well, they said I'm going to be, you know, a pilot of a 4-kilometer long starship. Did they tell you that?" And he's like, "No, they didn't tell me that." So, anyways, but yeah, everybody knew about it. Everybody knew that I was going to volunteer for this. And there's this guy. We're in the room about to play another game of Halo, and he said, "Yeah, I was on the moon, and I volunteered for the program, and I worked in these mines in the moons, and they put collars around your neck, and you didn't work fast enough, they would shock you." And he's like, the only motivation to work was they had these brothels, and you got to sleep with all these women. And he's like, "Yeah, it was great, man." He was like, "I loved it." And yeah, it was. And I said, "Well, you know, I thought maybe the XO just told everybody this just to get them to, like, you know, I don't know, be in these mines. I didn't even know there was mines on the moon or anything like that." And I said, "Well, the XO came up to me personally, and he said I have 195 IQ, and I was going to be a, you know, pilot of a 4-kilometer long starship." I said, "Did he tell you that?" And he said, "Nah, man." He's like, "They're going to take good care of you, and it's going to be great." And all of a sudden, we heard like this feedback, it sounded like, in the room. And it said, like, "Now hear this, now hear this. You are now in violations of Articles 54 and 56 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If you do not stop right now, you will can spend up to 10 years in prison and $100,000 in fines, and that'll be all." And it went away. And I said, "Is there a speaker in here?" I looked around in the room, and I said, "Is there a speaker?" And one of the guys said, "With the technology they have, they don't need speakers." And I said, "Well, what was that?" And he said, "We shouldn't talk about it." And they just stopped. Like, they're listening now, that we shouldn't talk. And so that guy, Orlando, came up to me the next day, and he's like, "Hey, did you hear that voice?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Did you see, you know, by the underground base, there was a big tower with a dish on top?" And he's like, "You see those rectangular blocks on it?" And I said, "Yeah, on the tower." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's 5G towers." He said, it's an experimental technology they're using on this base." He's like, he said they're able to create a microwave beam, and they can put it into a room, and they can see everything, and they can hear everything, and they can, like, talk to you if they want. So it's like they don't have to break into your room or anything. They can just send this microwave beam in from 5G towers, and they can just bug your room that way and listen to whatever you say. And yeah, so eventually, yeah, the moment of truth came up. It was like a Friday, and you know, I had on like my Johnny Cashes, like my working blues, you know, like the Man in Black, like a black tie, black shirt, black pants and stuff. And I came to the quarterdeck, and I signed like this many papers, like a book full of papers, like signing like a home mortgage. And he was even doing stuff like, you know, he was flipping it for me, signed here, initial here, flipped it, sign, initial, sign. And he was like doing that. And at first I tried to read it, and he said, "We'll be here all night if you read this." He's like,
Great.
and he said, "You're already back there, so just sign the damn papers." And I realized that I was already back from the program. Like, I was being age regressed, because the age regression takes a while. It takes a long time. So they actually send you back maybe a week or two beforehand, before you actually, you know, came into the program. So he said, "You're already back there, so just sign the damn paper." So it was like I was already back from the 20-year and back. I've already done this.
Wow.
So I already time traveled back in time, and I was being age regressed.
But you were wiped. You were wiped.
Yeah, but
So
I was in the process of being wiped and age regressed and put in a healing tank and given a clean bill of health and all this other stuff that they do to you whenever you come back.
Right. So like Joe Biden, somebody wiped you like they wiped Joe Biden, but in a totally different way. Wow.
Yeah, like they wipe your mind and everything like that. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, it was just, so I signed the papers. He said, "All right, sit down." I sat down, and he got on the phone. He said, "Send him in." And I waited, I don't know, 10 minutes. I was kind of daydreaming. And he said, "All right, go with him." And he pointed up in that same big glass window. There was this big reptile standing, like huge shoulder muscles. He was wearing like one of those skin tight blue uniforms you see. He was probably about 9.5 feet tall. He was a really dark brown. He had like a flat face with like a mouth that went straight across and then straight up. He had like ridges going down his head, almost like mohawks, like these ridges going down. And he had gold alligator eyes, like slitted eyes. And I remember I stood up and I said, Jesus Christ. Like, I stood up. I was going to run away. And then I said, he's not going to eat me, is he? And the first class petty officer said, if he wanted to eat you, he's much stronger than faster than you, and he would have done it by now. And I saw it sigh when I said this. And the last thing could read my mind, and I forgot to say that. And so I said to him, I said, can it read my mind? And he said, yes, he could read your mind. I remember in my head, I said, sorry about that. Like, I didn't want to make it upset. And then, so I finally got the courage. I walked with it. And we were walking, and there were like lines on the floor, and it was color coded. And it was like white was secret, a white line, blue was top secret, and red was I don't know. And what, you know, red went everywhere. And white went to the fewest places, and then blue, you know, went to some of the places. But it kind of looked like spaghetti going through different halls and doorways and stuff like that, lines going everywhere. And immediately we went through a hallway that was just a red only, and it was dark. And no light came on, no automatic light. I figured maybe an automatic light would come on, but I was like, well, I guess these things can see well in the dark. So I found myself like walking really close to it to try to like not get lost. And, you know, make a long story short, just kind of shorten it a little bit. It was just one of the guys told me, you know, like I said, the command was trying to get me, you know, acclimatized to whatever this situation that was going to happen to me. And I was in the TV room, and right across, and this was on the barracks, and right across the hall from the TV room, this guy was there, and he left his door open, and he was talking, but it was kind of like one of those things where he wanted me to overhear him on purpose. He wanted me to hear him. And he said something like, you're going to be taken to something called a density chamber. He said, we're only third density. Most of the ETs we deal with are fifth density. He said, it's going to push you artificially up in the fifth density. He said, you'll become stronger, faster. Your IQ will go up 200 points, and you'll become more of a collective. And like in a group, like when you're in a group of people, you become kind of like that group. And so this is where it was taking me, but it looked like a gas chamber. I finally saw it. You know, we walked deeper into the base, and there was like a, you know, like one of those airtight doors with the wheel on it. We had to go up a catwalk to get into it, and then I saw this chair. It was this big chair, like it was made for one of them, and it had holes in it and straps. So I thought it was like a gas chamber chair, and I was like, oh God, you know, I don't want to go into that. So I immediately tried to run away. I wanted to get out of here. And it grabbed me and threw me into the chair. And I kept on trying to get away. It was like strapped me in, and I was pulling it. I was trying to pull its fingers off of me, and it headbutted me and knocked me out for a second. And I looked down, and I had my whole right side in, and it was about through my left side. So I kind of, it was really big. Like I said, it was big, like it was meant for one of them. And I kind of got off of it and was standing on the ground and undoing the strap. And he put his hand on my chest and pushed me back in. And I could feel like his fingers here, but I could feel his palm there. That's like how big his hand was. Wow. And he kind of made that mating call like an alligator does, like a growl where you can't really hear it, but you could feel it like in your chest, like a rumble. And then as it got closer to me, I could hear it, and it said, don't make me hit you again. And I jammed my thumb in its eye, because that's like all I could think. I just wanted to get away, and it was like right there, like in my face. And it kind of leaned back, you know, away from me, and I saw a tear going down its face. So I was like, oh, I heard it. Like at least I heard it. And then it just leaned forward, and it just collapsed my chest until it pushed against my heart, and I blacked out. And then I woke up, and it was just all the straps were there on me, and it looked at me and it said, I'm sorry I have to do this to you. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And it walked out, and I just felt like this feeling, like I saw the door slam and close, and I was trying to hyperventilate. Maybe if I pass out, it won't hurt as much to gas. I thought it was going to be gas. I thought it was a gas chamber, and I was done. And I don't know, it felt almost like an out-of-body experience. It kind of felt like a weightlessness, like a cold. It felt like I kind of like left my body almost. And then all of a sudden I opened my eyes, and you go through like a kind of a temporary amnesia when they first do this to you. And everything is different. Everything is different. Colors are more vibrant. It's like everything is way different. And I saw its back was toward me, the reptile, and it was like kind of gesturing like it was talking, but it wasn't saying anything. And then I saw like a guy who was actually a first-class petty officer on the base, and he was dressed like a Gestapo. and he had like his hair slicked back with pomade, like a 1940s kind of undercut. And he's wearing like the black leather trench coat, and he was kind of talking to it too, but was not talking, like gesturing like he was talking. And I slid down from the chair, and I remember my back hit like one of the footrests because it was so high up, and I could barely stand up. And I said something like, "Can I go to sleep now?" And I fell down on all fours, and I was just trying to like stay up. And I remember I saw like his you know, knee-high boots kind of go in my field of vision. He had black leather knee-high boots, and he said, "I should have you executed for what you did to my man. Do you hear me?" And I just kind of like fell over on my side, and the reptile said, "It doesn't matter. He can't. He doesn't remember." I said, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't remember." I fell asleep. I passed back out. I woke up, and the reptile was like holding me like a duffel bag under his arm, and I was just kind of like walking with me. Yeah, and we walked through like I saw a bright light, and all of a sudden, like I was in like a hospital room. It looked like. And the XO told me later on that was because before I left the command, he told me all this stuff. He told me that was looking glass technology, like Alice in Wonderland stepping through the looking glass. He said it was taking me through a portal to the dark side of the moon, like inside the moon. And it was just like a regular big hospital bed, really wide, and it laid me down. And there was a woman there. And I said she was pretty, like I was really out of it. Like it was almost like I was drunk or something. I was like, "Ah, you're pretty." And there was like another girl there, and I heard her like, "Woo," like, do that thing. And I asked her if I could hold her hand, and she's like, "Well, let me do some tests." And I heard ripping and tearing and stuff like that. She was like ripping open like packages and putting, heart monitor stuff on me and stuff like that. And it was just like a physical almost. And I was wound up holding her hand, and I passed out. And I just like went to sleep. And I woke up the next day, and I saw her. She like came in. I was just all by myself in this big white room for hours. I didn't know what was happening. And like I said, I was kind of like this kid. Like I was really naive. I don't know if I think they wipe your mind in the chair, because that's what Robert kept on asking me to go back in the chair before I left the Navy. So they wipe you like in this chair as well. So it's almost like an ignorance is bliss kind of thing. You're kind of like a little child. And I was looking around, and everything was so interesting to me because I was in higher density, and everything was like, the colors were all more vibrant. I could hear all these sounds I couldn't hear before, and all this other stuff. And she walks in. She has a bag around her shoulder. She puts it on the desk, and she's just doing regular physical stuff, like put your fingers in between mine and squeeze. And she did like took a mallet and did a reflex test, hit my knee, and then she said, "All right, come on, get up." And I stood up. We sat down at this table across from each other, and she put down a smart glass pad, which is kind of like what the smartphone is based off of. It's like a rectangular plexiglass pad, and she put both her hands on either corner. I never saw them before, and like an image came up, like pop right out of it, of like a hologram of like a 3D kind of humanoid figure. She kind of stuck her finger in it and spun it around, and the image moved with it. And she could stick her hand into it and open it up. She saw the heart, the brain, and stuff like that. Wow. And then she was going to leave for the day, and I said, "Well, don't leave me. I don't know anybody." I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I said, "But just don't leave me." And she liked me, and she liked that. And so she took my hand, and we walked out, and it looked like we were in like a courtyard of a condominium, and there were like behind us there were like trains. And there were only men walking with like these gray kind of jumpsuits on. And there was like 5 levels of like balconies. And it was like when you're in a courtyard of a condo, it was like 5 levels going up. And there were women waving, and some of them had babies and stuff like that. And there were these lifts going up, these 4 big lifts going up and getting people off the floors and bringing them back down. And she grabbed my hand, and we walked on one of the lifts, and there was no railings or anything like that. We just went straight up, and it took us right to her room. She was like on the top floor, and we just took her right to the room. And I remember there was a woman standing there on the sidewalk of the 5th floor with a baby. And there was no railings or anything like that. And I said, "Aren't you afraid you're going to fall off with your baby?" And she said, "Oh, no, you can't fall off." And she just stepped off, and there was like an invisible field. And she said, "Yeah, the kids play on it, and they're not supposed to." But I said, "Well, how far does it go?" She goes, "It goes all the way to the end. You just run all the way across, and every floor had like a different kind of invisible field. So it was impossible for you to fall off." And we went to the room, And she took me by the hand. It was real Spartan. It was just like, I think it had like two to four, like it had a bar with like 2 to 4 bar stools, coffee table, a desk right by the door with like a lamp. There was like a couch. There's a bedroom and bathroom. And she took my hand and she took me to the bedroom and she said, we started to kiss. And she said, wait, she said, what's your name? And I said, I don't know. And she said, come on, think. Everybody knows their name. She goes, think. And I thought about it and I said, Daryl. And then we started to kiss and we had sex. And I was falling asleep on the headboard. I kind of just dozed off. She was laying on my chest. And it's just like I closed my eyes and I woke back up and I was like back in England. And it was like that. It was just like, but I saw this happened. Like, this wasn't like, oh, this could have happened. This happened. I remember seeing like blonde hair, blue eyed people in blue suits. And I remember seeing like, it was like I had this really rushed dream almost. And I woke up and I snapped out of it. And I remember being in a lot of pain. I remember being carried. And then, and then I just woke up and it was just like, it was like 10 o'clock. And I was like, I was with a woman. I was like, how can I be back in England? And I looked over and there was a chair in front of me that was in my room, and my uniform was laying really neatly on it, you know, like my pants first, and then my shirt, and then my chair, my shoes were tucked up underneath it, and I got up and I still had like my white dress shirt, undershirt on, like my white t-shirt and my boxers, and I still have my black socks on, and I never sleep with my socks on. I was like, what the hell's happening? Like, I still have my socks on, and I stood up. And I was like, okay, like I was really freaked out. And, you know, I went to put my uniform away and I put it in the, because I would have put it in the closet. I wouldn't have just laid it in front of me like that, like on a chair. And I took my shirt off and I was really toned. Like, I was in pretty good shape in the military in my 20s, but I had big chest muscles and I had big arm muscles. And I kind of like wiped my hand down and I had like burnt stubble from my chest hair. And I was freaked out, so I ran my fingers through my hair and I had burnt stubble in my hair, and I didn't know what was happening. And you know, I got dressed and I walked out, and there was a guy like waiting for me, like in the barracks, like in the hallway, and he thought of himself as like top dog of the barracks, and he said, "You made it." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, 20 years is a long time. A lot of people don't make it. He's like, "Congratulations." And I was like, "What?" But yeah, that's like how it was for me. Like, all these people knew that I was in the program, but I didn't know. And it was kind of like the people who didn't volunteer for the program kept an eye on the people who did volunteer for the program. And they let the command know if they remembered anything, if they would mention anything, you know. And so it's like we're almost constantly being spied on. And I don't know. That's the beginning of the story. If you'd like to ask any questions.
Wow. So this took place to the best of your knowledge in England. I mean, initially, were you?
Initially, yeah, but then the rest of it, as far as what I remembered, because I remember the first class petty officer said to me, some people remember the first day or two, but nobody remembers it after that. He said it's kind of common for people to remember the first day or two, but you really don't remember anything after that. He's like, you won't remember. And yeah, I remember a guy in the barracks one time. He kind of came out and he was kind of disheveled and he was running his fingers through his hair, and he said, like, I remember being in these mines and like I had this weird dream, like I don't know what happened, and like he was talking about him. He volunteered for the secret space program, but he didn't remember. But he remembered like the first couple days, a day or two. And I guess that's something common. A lot of people remember the first day, but they just blow it off as a dream.
So is part of the reason you're gone 20 years to learn a bunch of skills that now you have, or what's the significance and why are you gone that long?
Well, before I left the command, I talked to the XO. Like, when you're getting out of the Navy or the military for good, you get to talk to the master chief of the base, it was like the third in command, the executive officer, and commanding officer. And it's like you can say whatever you want, but you can't break the law. Like, you can call them an asshole or whatever, but you can't threaten them. It's just like a tradition they have when you're getting out for good. And I saw him, and he just told me everything, the XO. And he said that I was like a son to him. And I guess he had to participate in my torture with a keno, so he felt bad. So he felt like he had to like tell me these things. He said most people commit suicide within the first 6 months who have memories of the 20-year and back. And he said you have to go back in the chair. He's like, you're not going to make it. He's like, most people don't make it. You have to go back in the chair, get your mind rewiped. And he told me that, like, he said that we have a contract. He didn't go into details. I'm guessing it's with reptiles or grays, but he said we have a contract with, as far as sending people into this program, as far as this, like, being, I don't know, like workers. I know human beings are sought after for our DNA, and we're very creative. ETCS is very creative, but our lives are kept short on purpose because, like, the negative ETs are kind of afraid of our true potential. So that, and Robert was telling me that, he said, you know, they poison our water, our air, our food. He told me that, you know, the chemtrails are real, and, like, that's a way that they accelerate our aging process. But, you know, they poison, but also this, all these poisons they use. We should live much longer than we do, but everything that we eat, consume, breathe, it's all designed to, like, cause us to age prematurely. So we never really catch on to our true potential.
So real quick, so since that affects us, doesn't that affect, so you know, the people that are doing it too, or do they eat, and I mean they breathe similar water and air, I think, unless they're all hanging out underground? Like, are they in some way poisoning themselves at all, or is that not the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember it was 48 hours. They didn't want, like, to be above ground or on Earth for more than 48 hours. I guess it would take about that long before it would start affecting you. But yeah, that's why the reptiles, all these different ETs, they live underground because it doesn't affect them. You know, they have their own air. They actually have well, they have, like, their own ecosystem once you go deep enough down. But I remember the pump I was watching the civilian workers work on. I just asked them. I said, "What's this pump for?" And they said, "Well, there's groundwater, and we extract the groundwater, and we separate the oxygen from the hydrogen, kind of like a submarine, and that's how the people can breathe under here. It's like we have pumps that can. It goes into the groundwater, and it pulls the oxygen from the hydrogen, and so they have their own oxygen. You know what I mean? And but yeah, it's like everything is all right there for them, so it doesn't affect them at all." And he started telling me, like, all these people on the base were all off-world Germans. That's what, like, the military calls them. Like the Master Chief, who's the third command, he was an off-world German, like a spy, but he was a Master Chief in the Navy. The S3, who's like fourth in command, he's like the legal officer. He was a lieutenant. He was an off-world German. He told me he was on my ship. He was the first officer on my ship. So these guys kind of had, like, two different lives. They were like these off-world Germans, but they were also in the Dark Fleet, what it's called, like Nachtwaffen. But, you know, they were also, you know, posing as, like, Navy work guys in the Navy. Some officers, some enlisted, but they were all like all. And he told me, like, a Master Chief with a mustache, or a senior chief with a mustache. He was an off-world German with glasses. The first class petty officer, the one that I first saw, who was dressed like a Gestapo and said I should have you executed for what you did to my man. He was an off-world German, and he was a first class petty officer. And I remember the Master Chief was fat. He wore glasses. That lieutenant wore glasses. And as he was talking to me, I remember being around these guys, around these Germans. As he was talking to me, I more and more memories were coming to me, the XO. And I said, I remember they're in good shape. Like, they're all, like, in really good shape, you know, and they have tech in your body that keeps your muscles toned and keeps you in, you know, muscular, strong, good shape. Plus they're genetically augmented in the womb, so they're stronger than, like, any person can naturally be. And I said, well, why does the Master Chief, why is he overweight, you know, and wear glasses? Why does this guy wear glasses? I said that they, you know, unfocus their eyes and slow down their metabolism with the tech in their body. And he said, yes. And I said, why do they do that? And he said, well, we can't just have a bunch of Ubermen running around on base now, can we? And I said, talk about attention to detail. And he said, yes. So it's like they do all this stuff so they fit in more, and they blend in more. And yeah, the doctor of the base, who was lieutenant, like the head doctor, he was an off-world German. And so they had these off-world Germans everywhere. I'm guessing some of them were probably English officers as well.
Wow. So this sounds like like confirmation of what we hear a lot about you know, the Nazis working with the Dracos, and that's kind of where a lot of problems got started. You know, now you mentioned chemtrails and whatnot, but it sounds like our military was complicit in this program completely.
Yeah, I think that Project Paperclip thing went a lot deeper than we realized.
Yeah.
It sounded like we lost World War II, yeah. As far as what I saw here. We won it initially, but eventually they infiltrated our military and government so much that they just took us over that way, secretly.
Now, do you have the impression that you were off world during this period of time, or that you were subterranean during this period of time? A little bit of both?
I was off world, and yeah, I was a pilot of it. Well, at first, I asked Robert, you know, I always go back to him because it's kind of like my anchor. Like a lot of people say, like, how do you remember so much? And if this guy didn't tell me all this stuff because he felt bad about what he was forced to do, to me, I would have thought probably it was like a dream. I probably would have. I think the reason he was telling me this stuff is so I realized it wasn't like a hallucination, so I wouldn't take my own life. And you know, because he realized I wasn't going to go back in the chair, so then he just started telling me things. And yeah, he told me I wanted a timeline. I said I remember being in mines. I remember that. I remember working in the mines. And I said, was that in the Earth? He said that was in the moon. I said I was on the moon. He said you were on Mars too. I said when was I on Mars? He said when you're in the Dark Fleet. I was like, what's that? He's like, it's an off-world German society, you know, that are like mercenaries for the Reptilians. And then I said, and then the rest of the time, and then I started remembering the conversation I had with him all of a sudden. Like I started, like it seemed like they went back in time and kind of wiped my mind about being a pilot too, while volunteering for that. But I remembered that, and I said, then the rest of the time I was in Solar Warden, and he said you were with them, and I said, and it was like the Nordics, like and I said, I kind of shortened the story a little bit because you know I wouldn't have as much time, but on the base there was a bar on the base, and I walked in like after Aquino was torturing me, and there was these Satanists in the room with him and stuff like that, and it turned out they were like British Army, these guys who were Satanists that kind of worked with the reptiles on the ground, and they were the guys who dealt with getting the Adrenochrome from children and stuff like that, and these underground bases. And I walked in, and he said, this Satanist, I call him the Goon. He had a shaved head, and he was a big guy, and he's a British Army. He goes, hey, he said, it's the King of the Tibetans. He's like, what's up, man? He's like, Aquino fucked you up, and he's like, he had me like hitting you with a hammer, hitting your toes, smashing your toes. He's like, I didn't want to do it. He's like, but he made me. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I said, what's the Tibetan? And he said, you ever heard of that Billy Meyer guy? Because I sat down next to him. I thought they were just fucking with me because I had no recollection of this at all. And I sat down. I was there watching the movie, and he said, I said, what's that? He's like, well, you've ever heard of Billy Meyer? And I said, no, I didn't know any of this stuff. He's like, well, yeah, the Pleiadians and stuff like that. He's like, you should look up Billy Meyer and you'll figure it out more. And I was like, all right. And I remember the guys at the bait or the guys at the bar, the other ones, the other Satanists, they said, shut up. You're not supposed to tell them stuff like that. And he's like, he likes it. And I did like it. Like I went to this bar and I kept on going because it was like when he would get drunk, it was like he would tell me stuff about like a life that I didn't know I had and stuff like that. And so I said to Robert, I said, well, they're the ones they call the Pleiadians, right? And he's like, yeah. Because he said, I said, well, the rest of the time I was in Solar Warden because he said I was in the mines, then I was in Dark Fleet. I was in the mines for 3 months. I was in Dark Fleet for 2 years. And I said, and the rest of the time I was in Solar Warden. He said, you were with them. And I said, they were the ones they call Pleiadians, right? And he said, we call them Nordics, talking about the military. So what do they call themselves? He said, Tibetan. So he told me this stuff. He told me that I was a pilot. And there's like a joint, I remember there was like a joint kind of task force with like what you call like Pleiadian people and with the Solar Warden, which is like United States Navy secret space program. It's like a joint task force. It's their technology, but our materials, our titanium. But one of the stipulations is they can commandeer our ships at any time for any reason. No questions asked. So that's why they gave us. So it's like they're helping us with this whole reptilian threat because they're fighting it too. And he told me, Robert was telling me all this stuff, and he was just telling me that, we won and we're winning. And he was like, he's just telling me crazy stuff about. He said, he's like, we're gonna have a black president, and I said, really? And this was like, I don't know, probably 2 years after we killed Saddam Hussein. He's like, yeah, he's going to be called Barack Hussein Obama. And I was like, what? This is like in 2005. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. And then he started telling me about like, he started telling me he came from a different timeline. And they had to go back to the timeline. He was from the year 2580. He had to go back in time. and fix the timelines. And he said that they had these breeding programs, and it wound up that everybody looked like Mike Pence. He looked kind of like and he told me that he was looking down my timeline at the time, and he's like, "You think I look like Mike Pence? You're right." Because he was like, he was fifth density, and he was genetically engineered in the womb for this mission, and he was from this future where people were fifth density. You know, they ascended, as they call it, to a fifth density. And he could actually, like, he called it looking down your timeline. He could predict my future. He can kind of live my life by like going down my timeline and knowing all the memories I would create, all the things that I would experience in the future. He was kind of like going through that, like fast forward and just experiencing all these things that I was going to experience. And he said, "You think I look like Mike Pence in the future?" He's like, I said, "Who's Mike Pence?" He's like, "He's this politician. He becomes vice president." And he said, "You're right." He said, "He comes from the same timeline as me." He said, "But he's no good." He said he dealt with like things like pedophilia and adrenochrome and stuff like that. He wasn't a good person. And but yeah, he said that they all have. He said we all have black hair. We all have usually, you know, brown eyes and sometimes blue or green, kind of like that needle nose like Mike Pence has. And he had that constant scowl on his face, kind of like Mike Pence. And he said our hair begins to salt and pepper at 50 years old. It turns pure white by 60 years old. Our eyebrows turn white at 70. And on average, we live to about 110 years old. And I said, "Well, that sucks." I said, "People in Star Trek live to 120. And he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "We didn't reach our true potential." And he said, "You aged like them," talking about the Pleiadians. He's like, "You're on their world and you aged like them." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You look like the way you do right now." And it was, you know, over 20 years in the future, and I was 27 at the time. And, you know, so I was more like the age I am right now. And he's like, "You age like them while you're on their world." And that's when I asked him, I said, "Well, will I age that way in the future?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, why not?" And that's when he told me about they poison the air, they poison the water, they poison everything, and it causes you to age very quickly. And yeah, he started. I remember I said I saw children in cages when I came back from the 20-year and back, and I kept on saying to him, you know, "What were the cages for, Robert? What were the cages for?" And he was trying to change the subject, and I wouldn't do it. I said, "What were the cages for?" And he said, "Do you remember that movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Remember the adrenochrome scene?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's where they get it from." He said they put the kids in those cages. They said they get them from the moon primarily, and that's what the brothels are for mostly. They take the kids, they put them through the portals after they're done weaning from their mother, and they're almost like harvesting like veal. And he said that they, you know, I remember the cages were stacked up. They looked like dog kennels almost. They're stacked up like probably 3 high by about 5 wide. And I saw a little girl come up and she slammed her hands on the cage and like looked at me, and she kind of looked like that girl from that movie, The Grudge. Like she was pure white, and her hair was just like knotted and down, and she was naked, and her eyes were very dilated. It was dark in there in the caverns. And he said they electrify those cages and they pull them out, strap them to a table. They give them almost like a spinal tap at the base of the skull, and that's how they extract the adrenochrome. So the electrocution causes it, you know, the adrenaline to kick into their body. They electrocute them, they're passed out. And they strap these tables and they get it out that way. He said they get a pint or two at a time. And I said, "Well, some of those kids were like 4 or 5 years old." I said, "That would kill a kid." You know, he says a lot of times it does. He said that they grind them up in something that looks like a wood chipper and they feed them to the other children. And I guess that's what they eat. They don't live very long. And he said once they show signs of puberty, they slit their throats and they put them in this machine, looks like a wood chipper, and feed them the other, because they don't have as many stem cells. Once you hit puberty, you lose a lot of your stem cells, and that's what they're looking for, is that stem cell. He started telling me about, you know, the adrenochrome thing and how it worked. And, you know, he's just telling me about in the future, you know, these people are going to, you know, movie stars are on it. He's like, everybody's in on it. He's like, all the actors are on it, musicians, most of the politicians, you know, like all these people are in on it. And he asked me if I knew about, you know, he said, "You know the guys from South Park?" And I said, "Yeah, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, I know them, yeah." And he said, "Yeah." He's like, "Remember when they went to the Oscars?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "They were on acid and they went in drag." And he smiled and he said, "Yeah." He's like, "You know why they did that?" And I said, "No." He said, because they hate them. And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Hollywood." He said, "They're all scum." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they're all scum." He's like, "They all do this adrenochrome thing. They're all pedophiles, and they all torture kids, and they take this adrenochrome stuff, and they know where it comes from, but they don't care because it's like they're addicted to it. And he said, how do you think Tom Cruise stays perpetually 30 years old? And at the time, I remember, I think he was around 30. I said, is he like 35? He's like, you'll find out. And he was like, because he time traveled so much, it was almost like he wasn't just here. He was just kind of like, and he was in this fifth density where he was just kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to explain it. You can find yourself going forward in the future and coming back into your body and things like that.
Are you referring to Tom in this statement?
No,
Tom Cruise. He was talking about Tom Cruise, and he said, yeah, and he said when he did that whole thing with like, I'm in love with Katie Holmes, and he was like, he had Oprah pinned down to the couch, and he was flipping out, and he was like freaking out, jumping on the couch. He said he just got done shooting up Adrenochrome. He's like, that's how they act. They get really manic, and it's like they're on cocaine. And when he did that thing on, I was actually in France. I was in England, and I was on the Eurorail, but I remember seeing on TV in France, and when he did the whole thing, you're glib on Good Morning America, we get people off drugs, and he's like yelling off at the guy and stuff. He's like, he just got done doing it there. He's like, that's how they act. They act really insane and manic, kind of like that. And he said that they try to get their blood type so they can inject it. So they get a better high, but it's so rare you can't always get your blood type. So then they'll just drink it. But yeah, and he told me that they have to do it once a week, and if they don't do it once a week, they begin to age quickly. He's like, if you've been doing it for 10 years, you'll age like 20 years in 2 weeks.
Whew.
And he said, you usually will die by the third week. And he said, that's how they're going to get them to talk. He's like, they're going to start, catching these people. And he told me about, the whole Silk Road thing, about how they're going to be giving them this kind of adrenochrome. You're going to be selling it through like the dark web, but it's not going to be real, but it's going to have like a tech in it that's going to be able to be admissible as evidence in court that, yeah, you participate in taking adrenochrome and you know where it comes from. So it's the same thing as murder. And so they're going to inject this. It'll be like a tech they can track in their bodies, because all the adrenochrome will run out, he said. And so everybody will freak out. They'll just look for it everywhere. And the military is going to be selling it in these, dark websites and stuff like that. And it's going to have this tech in it. It's going to be traceable. And they're going to start arresting people just by doing it that way. And he told me about Tom Cruise was like, or not Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks was the kingpin of adrenochrome. And he was like the main distributor. And he said we caught him. He said we caught him in Australia. That's what that whole Australia thing was, I think. He said we caught him there. He's like, but he wouldn't talk. He said they're going to lock him away like in a cage. They're going to go through the withdrawal of adrenochrome. And we're kind of going to dangle a vial of it in front of him and said, if you tell on your buddies, we'll give you this. He said, but he wouldn't crack. He wouldn't tell. He said he wound up not dying from it, but they just executed him. And he said that they're going to start doing he told me about public executions and things like that. I don't know when it's going to happen. I'm not 100%. This was decades ago when he told me this. And like I said, I kind of forced myself to forget about it, because I was thinking about it every day and it was driving me crazy. So I realized I had to let it go. But he said that they're going to start doing things like somebody will walk into an office of, a major, musician or movie star. There'll be a guy with a suit, they'll slide a paper in front of them. They'll show them on the phone all the evidence they have against them of doing horrible things. They'll say, you can either sign this confession and we'll give you a lethal injection. Just go to sleep. You won't wake up. And a lot of people, they'll save their reputations. They'll just say they'll die of natural causes and things like that. He told me about the whole, the Wuhan flu and stuff. He said a lot of the people are going to be supposedly dying of the Wuhan flu, but a lot of them, it's just they were executed and they just signed a confession. They got it over with. He said, but if they don't, they'll be put before a military tribunal, and they'll be executed by firing squad with no reload. And that was very important to him. I said, what does that mean, no reload? And he said, I guess it's a law. When you get shot by a firing squad, they don't have to reload their weapons. So if they just hit you in the liver or something like that, and it takes you 4 hours to slowly bleed out and die, then that's the way you die, and it's completely legal. And he said, so it's a good incentive to just sign the confession papers and do it that way.
Okay, quick question. So he told you this how long ago?
Yeah, just a couple decades ago.
Okay.
Yeah, this was like in 2005.
Okay,
it was
so
2 years. Yeah.
Okay, so because Linda Paris had on her show, I think he goes by the name Christian. I'd have to look, but they were talking about how a lot of the adrenochrome was mixed in with something that when these people took it, that in this, I guess this happened in the last few years, that a lot of them died a very painful death, and it kind of ate them from the inside out. Were you familiar with that story on her show?
Well, like I said, I was told that and I'm sure probably, I mean, if you deal in dark web stuff, you probably know this stuff is real. You know what I mean? If you're dealing with dark web kind of stuff, if you're one of the people who does stuff on the dark web for people's entertainment and things like that, you probably know that these elites and rich and stuff like that, they use this drug. And yeah, I could see probably maybe they were just selling them like a bumpkiss version of Adrenochrome, and they were dying from it. But he told me, he said the military would be selling them like a fraudulent kind of Adrenochrome that just had like a technology in it.
Wow.
Like a nanotech, to where you would just scan something over their arm or over their body, and you'd be like, all right, you took it. You know, that's the same as murder. You know, we can execute you now. It's the same as murder if you take this drug, because you know where it comes from.
Yeah, you mentioned Project Looking Glass earlier on, which we're somewhat familiar with, but what kind of details can you share about Project Looking Glass?
Well, I was kind of like, he was trying to get my confidence, is what he said. And he said, out of the blue, he said, I saw your dad. He said that because I said, what? I said, my dad's been dead for years. You know, how did you see him? And he just looked at me and he said, through the looking glass. And I said, well, what's that? Because I didn't really have any memory. And he's like, you walked through the looking glass when you went to the moon. He's like, you've seen looking glass technology. You've used it. And I still have barely a grasp of memory of me using it, actually. But he said, yeah, he said, you can go anywhere in time, anywhere on the earth, and you could just observe, like you're looking at at the looking glass, like at a mirror. And he was telling me things like, yeah, your dad wore thick glasses. I said, yeah, he did. I said, and he rolled his sleeves up on a t-shirt. I said, yeah. And I said, why'd you want to see him? He said, I wanted to see if he walked like you. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you know, the way you bob up and down and swagger. And I said, bebopping around? He's like, yeah. He's like, is that what your dad called it? And I said, yeah. He's like, bebop. And I said, did he? And he said, yeah. And he said he saw my dad in his early 20s. And he said that, yeah, he's like, you can go anywhere on earth and you can just observe. And he's like, but then you can step through the looking glass and you'll just show up wherever you were looking. And I said, well, what does it look like to people on the outside? That you just kind of appeared out of nowhere? And he said, yeah, pretty much. And he told me that. And yeah, he said that's looking glass technology, and that's how it works. And he said that they would put it in bombers. He started telling me this stuff, and with bomb bay doors, they would put looking glass flat down, and they'd fly it over certain parts of the earth to make sure their mission was being accomplished properly. I guess if you're closer to the target, it becomes more accurate. He said it was accurate within a 94% accuracy as far as predicting the future from where you're at right now. And this comes to the time travel, which is really confusing. You can go to the past, and the past is concrete. But if where you're at right now is the future, then it's still kind of hazy within like 94%. It's pretty dead on, but there can be variables that they're not aware of. So they actually will put them in these bombers. They open the bomb bay doors, and they'll fly over different parts of the earth to see if geography is changing, if different cities are being built, other cities are being destroyed, and they can see it with almost 100% accuracy as long as they're right over the target of what they're looking at. And he's telling me that too.
Yep. It's often talked about or speculated that around 2012 there was a change in how that technology worked, and that prior to that they used to go back and affect the timelines in a way that would adjust the present or the future to to their liking. And at some point around 2012, those inputs no longer impacted the future, that it had become a set future that they could no longer manipulate. Are you familiar with that part?
Yeah, because I asked them, like, how are we doing this? How are we going to do all this as far as stuff with the future and things like that, and manipulating the timeline, like you said. And he said, Krueger's helping us. And I said, what's Krueger? And he just said real nonchalant. He's like, it's a corporation from an alternate Earth where Germany won World War II, and they figured out universal travel. They're the only universe we know of besides the negative AI, which is what's in the reptiles, where they can actually go. There's 8 different universes, he said, I believe is what he said, that we know of. And he said Krueger has a technology to where they can go from universe to universe. And they're actually helping different Earths out as far as like positively. They're as far as what he said, they're actually helping us. So yeah, Krueger, he said Krueger has a technology where they can't be stopped. It's like they kept on replaying scenarios with using time travel, and like say like, okay, we messed up over here. Okay, we're gonna need more supplies in this area. Okay, and then they'll go back in time, they'll do it again, and they'll replay it, and they're like, all right, we didn't do this properly, so then we're gonna have to send more troops over here. And then they go back in time and they see how it happens then. And so they can just go back in time an unlimited amount of times, so they can win any war. Like they can win any conflict. And that's what this is with the time travel and stuff like that. So yeah, that's why the Looking Glass came to a point where they couldn't change it anymore. It's because Krueger has this technology where they just have them in checkmate every time, where they can just go back in time and change it every time.
So it still works for Krueger.
Yeah, it still works for Krueger. And Krueger is one of these, and he told me I worked with Krueger, and yeah, and a lot of the Dark Fleet became like a breakaway. You know, you think of them, you know, that they're all bad guys, but they became like they broke away from the Reptilian Empire, and they're actually helping us now. So a big part of like these off-world Germans and stuff like that are actually working to help Earth now instead of against it.
Okay, I have a question on this topic. So people, you know, obviously you're familiar with Donald Marshall, right?
Yeah, of course.
So people in the Donald Marshall camp, there's people that we're in touch with. They say, you know, from what we've heard, you know, Trump has been in the cloning centers, and Donald himself is not a fan of Trump and says stuff like that. So, and we're trying to get some clarity on this because we're trying to, you know, bring unity and understanding to all this with a lot of different conflicting, you know, we hear the earth is round, we hear the earth is flat, and not that that's our topic, but you know, you hear a lot of conflicting goes. What is your take on Trump, and how is he utilizing this technology? I mean, is he, from our understanding, he's helping humanity, and a lot of people in kind of in that Donald Marshall camp don't believe that. Can you provide some clarity on that topic?
Yeah, because well, Robert told me that Trump was going to be president. And I remember it was almost like the Back to the Future kind of thing of the billionaire, like he's going to be president. He said, yeah, he's going to be president. And he said, you know, he's helping us and stuff like that. And I said, well, you know, is he good? Is he all right? And Robert just kind of said, yeah, he's all right. Like he's all right. He's like, but Trump is just a figurehead. He said it's the military. He said he's like Trump is just kind of like just to be the figurehead for the voice of the people. But he said it's not just United States military. He said it's Russia, you know, China, India, you know, most of Europe, you know, all these militaries came together and they said basically enough is enough. And he told me like why it became that way. He said that there's going to be a coup. And I said, well, you know, in my head, I thought, well, coups are bad. I'd say, well, you know, what should I do? You know, in the future, he said, there's going to be a coup. And he's like, no, he's like, you're going to want this coup. This is a good coup. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, Daryl, they start castrating children. And I said, what? He's like, yeah. He said, that's when the military stepped in. He said, that's whenever like they had enough with the whole transgender thing. He's like, the military didn't like that at all. He said, we didn't like Bush Senior. He said that then, you know, people in the military started talking, high-ranking officers started talking then. He said, we really hated the Clintons. He's like, and that's whenever this started. He's like, we didn't like the Clintons at all, and this is when all this started. And then he said, like, Bush Jr. was just a puppet. He's like, we didn't like Obama. And then that's when he said that, yeah, Hillary Clinton won the election because of fraud. He's like, so we just committed fraud right back on them, and we got Trump in instead. And, yeah, he told me that, yeah, like, he told me about this alternate future that he came from. He said when Hillary Clinton won the election, it was this like all this. On the first term, I don't know. He just kept on saying like my ancestors. He kept on saying that. He's like, you know, we started. You know, my ancestors were, you know, murdered and raped, and the police did nothing, and the press said nothing. And if we tried to fight back, like if somebody broke into our house and we shot them, We were the ones that went to prison for it. And then he said in Hillary Clinton's second term, we got into a war with China that was intended to be lost because we had the Second Amendment and too many people are armed. So they figured it would have taken too long. It would have taken, you know, a decade or two to actually defeat the United States. So instead, we just got into a war with China that was intended to be lost. He said it, and we were carpet bombed with nuclear weapons. He said not just key targets. He said the United States was carpet bombed and fell. And then he started telling me about all these breeding programs that they started putting people in and stuff. And yeah, it was just bad. It was pretty bad what he was telling me.
That's what would have happened.
What would have happened? Yeah, what would have happened? And the military stepped in, and Krueger offered their help, and that's when Krueger, you know, said that, you know, we can help you, you know, change this timeline. And so they changed the timeline. And I remember I asked him, I said, well, was your mission successful? And he said, yeah. I said, well, what about your mom and dad? And he said, my mother's gone, my father's gone. He said, my brothers and sisters are gone. And I said, well, why are you still here? And he said, I don't know. Like he didn't, maybe because he was in our time at the time it happened. He had no idea. And he had a daughter. And I said, what was your wife from that time? And he said, no. And I said, well, then what will happen to your daughter? And he got really scared. And he said, I don't know. Like he didn't know what was going to happen to her. Because for some reason, he wasn't affected.
Wow. Well, yeah, I'm curious about Mars. You mentioned maybe spending a little time there,
Yes.
and I know that factors into the story as I have collected anyway. But what can you tell us about Mars and its role in all of this?
When I was on Mars and the Dark Fleet, that was when I was in the Dark Fleet. We mostly did things like getting mantises, like the mantis ETs, which look like praying mantises. They're really good at DNA manipulation. Everything in the universe kind of has a clique, and their clique is like they're the masters at manipulating DNA. I remember hearing things about how they played a big part in creating us, like as human beings, because we're many different strains of DNA from different species and stuff like that, all kind of put together. And that's why we're so sought after, is because our DNA is so easily manipulated. We can be spliced with anything pretty much. And yeah, like that was the main thing I did. There were spiders on Mars. I remember that. I remember what the German, the first officer of the ship I was on. He became almost like a friend of mine, and he was checking my suit. You wear like these cloaking suits, and you have to wear. There is oxygen on Mars, but not as much as Earth. Like you can basically walk and sit down, and you're fine. But if you try to run, you'll pass out from, you know, lack of oxygen. It's almost like trying to run on a mountain. You can't do it. So you actually have to wear suits for air, and they cloak. And he was like making sure my suit was on right, and he said, if one of the mantises run into a cave, don't follow it. He said, just cloak and just stay there. And I said, why? He said, there's spiders in those caves. He said, 3 kilometers in diameter. And he said they're about as smart as a dog, and the mantises can control them telepathically. The mantises are very strong telepaths. And yeah, I remember that. I remember there were spiders in the caves. And
how big they were?
3 kilometers?
Oh, I'm sorry. 3 kilometers. Did I say kilometers? 3 meters. 3 meters in diameter.
Okay.
Like 9 feet. So about 10 feet.
Right.
Quick question on Mars. When, you know, where, if we're, you know, if we're here looking up, I mean, how does one get to Mars? Where is it? Is it where they say it is? How do you get there? I mean, you know, they say rocket ships are going in space, but is it actually there? Is it inner Earth? How does one get to Mars?
Well, the moon is almost like it's almost like a jumping off point. You go through a portal in the underground base into the moon, and then that's why you don't see a lot of ships and stuff like that, because the ships actually take off from the dark side of the moon. And you could take ships that go to Mars and things like that. Yeah. And that's how you get there. But I mean, you can go through, there's portals too. And you actually, when you're on these ships, you use things called jumps. And you use jumps. And I remember I was asking Robert, when he first told me about the program, when he was first talking to me, and I said, well, does the universe work like Einstein said, where it's constantly growing at the speed of light? And he said, no. He said there's a limit. It just stops. And then I said, well, how long would it take to get to the end of the universe from here. And he thought about it, and he said, and I think he said, 7 or 8 years is what he. It didn't he could even said, oh, at the speed of light, and he kind of thought about it. He's like, 7 or 8. So it doesn't sound like the universe is as big as people say, and it sounds like it's a lot more compact as far as what he told me. But then he said, with the proper amount of jumps, he said about 15 minutes. He said if you took about the proper amount of jumps.
So the travels through portals. It's not getting in a ship and going from one point A to point B. It's
both.
It's jumps. But you can get there from point A to point B. But what people don't understand about going at the speed of light is you enter almost like kind of like almost like a spirit world. It's like once you start approaching the speed of light, you don't have to take into account worlds, stars, and there is they found out in the 90s there's actually kind of like a dark matter where there's actual substance in space where you can actually crash. It's not just all emptiness. There's actually patches of substance. But whenever you approach the speed of light and you go into the speed of light, you enter almost like a spirit realm where you can just go right through things. You don't have to calculate anything. You don't have to calculate for worlds. So it is almost like a jump in itself, if that makes sense. But yeah, once you approach the speed of light, it's almost like you kind of enter like a different realm almost of existence.
Got it. Well, on that topic, we had sometimes we refer to our previous interviews. We had a gentleman named God, did we say his name? Anyway, there's 2 episodes. It's episode number 50, and there's a little alien, and he was talking about how taking adrenochrome, that there's a component of time travel that people can access on that substance. Are you familiar with that, or is that something you've not heard of?
Well, that's almost like I could see that because, like I said, fifth density was so much different. And there are people that can do that. It sounds almost like going through your own timeline, going through your own future. Where when you're in fifth density, and maybe adrenochrome acts this way as well. I remember at times I would find myself kind of being 5 years in my future and kind of being in my body and experiencing almost being like a passenger and like my 5-year self in the future and kind of just observing and just realizing like, oh, whoa, this is me like 5-10 years down the line. And, I've gone down my own timeline and just kind of being there for a few minutes and then just coming right back to where I was in my present and not even knowing like what happened. That's what's so different about why it's so difficult to explain fifth density. And even the memories are different because it's like you're seeing it through like a whole different world. I can't explain to you how different it is. It's not just you're more of a collective, you have a higher IQ, you're faster, you're stronger. It's not just that. It's just you experience things. You could see things you usually can't see. Like reptiles are fourth density beings, which is kind of like spirit realm, astral plane, things like that. So I remember when we were talking about Aquino in the office with Robert, when I was talking, I was like, well, what about Aquino? I was like, I was asking about him because I could remember that. And we were talking about him for a while. And he said, we should stop talking about Aquino now. And I said, why? And he said, he's fourth density. And I said, so? And he said, that's like astral plane, spirit world. And I said, so? He said, we could conjure him if we think about him too much. He said, he could be in the office with us right now and we wouldn't know it. He said, I'd have a better chance of knowing than you because I'm fifth density. He's like, but I might not be able to see him either. So that's something else you learn too. It's a lot more spiritual than you think. Dealing with ETs and going through this program and stuff like that. There's a lot more of a spiritual aspect that you have to understand as well. And it's strange.
So Aquino's not human.
No, he's like a reptile. He looked almost like a snake, kind of like a snake's head, like a black, onyx black, shiny black kind of snake head coming out of like a red robe and a red hood. And but sometimes I would see him with long fangs, and sometimes I wouldn't, because he was able to kind of do trickster stuff to me more because I was dropped back down to the third density by this time. And and I also remember Robert telling me about third density beings can't see portals and can't go through portals. He said you wouldn't be able to go through that looking glass technology because you're only if you were third density. He said they have to put you in that density chamber and push you up into a higher density because third density beings can't see portals and can't go through them. And he said that I said, well, what would have happened if he's holding me like a duffel bag and he walked through that portal and I was only third density? He said he just would have dropped you. You just would have fell. You wouldn't be able to go through. And he told me about the Babylonian arch that you would see in the Vatican courtyard. He said that's a real portal. He's like, but because we're only third density, we can't see the portal and we can't walk through the portal. He said you have to be at least fourth density or higher to use portals. Third density beings can't use them.
So what do you understand about the process of going from third to fifth density? Like what physical changes occur, or what is that process?
Well, it has to be a correlation between the world and the star together. It can't just be one or the other. He told me I think right now our world is like fifth density, but our star isn't. So our star has to like go up. It has to be like a combination of the both.
So it's an environmental thing more than an individual thing.
It's an individual. Well, it's an individual thing in the sense that he told me all this is going to happen, and it's going to be hard, and it's intended to be hard, because we all have to get to a point where we're going to have to kind of, as a collective of people, say we're not going to take this anymore, and we're not going to do this anymore. And he told me that they're going to start showing the things with what they do to the kids in the underground bases and stuff like that, because the people have to see this, and it has to be something that has to be ingrained. He called it the memory of the DNA memory, is what he said. He said your DNA has a memory, or if something is so traumatizing that it's almost like a monarch kind of effect, where it goes from generation to generation, where the people will never let this happen again. So we have to reach kind of like a collective level of, we have to see all these horrible things that have been done to us and our children and things like that, because we have to realize that we can't just watch sports and stuff all the time and let them just do these things to us. We have to be part of our community and a part of what's happening in our politics, and we have to be a stronger part in this. And that's it, kind of like, and I asked him, are we going to go up, and are we going to ascend into a higher density? And he just smiled. It was almost like he didn't want to tell me. It was almost like maybe he himself, he said we would, but he didn't know. It was almost like he didn't know if it was going to happen in my lifetime. But he did say it's going to be so much better. He did say at first it's going to happen in a trickle, and then it'll happen faster and faster. He said the first thing you're going to see are smartphones. He said they're based off the smart glass pad. And I said, what's a smart glass pad? He's like, he was kind of doing this thing to me where he said, the smart glass pad, you remember. And all of a sudden, like these waves of memory would kind of hit me. I don't know if it was a fifth density thing or if I was just doing it myself. And I was like, oh God, like how did I ever forget that? Like how did I ever, I remember using these things all the time all of a sudden. And then he said you would start seeing things like, and then he said med beds would come out, with age regression technology, healing tanks, and all these things would come out. And he asked me, he said, where do you think the world's gold's at? And I was living in England at the time. I just went to, the Bank of London, the courtyard where they had the big dragon with the shield. All the banking systems of London are there. It's kind of like the Vatican, like its own sovereign land. And I said, well, I would say the Bank of London, Bank of England area. And he said, no, it's in the catacombs of the Vatican. He said, a septillion is what he said. He said, just mounds and mounds and mounds of gold, enough to make everybody on Earth 100 millionaire. I said, well, everybody become 100 millionaire. And he said, no, nobody would work. He's like, but it's going to be so good. He said things like you're going to be able to pay off a brand new car in 6 months. You'll be able to pay off a house in 3 years. The economy is going to be so. He said, but everybody has to work. And he said, like, things that people that have mental disorders or physical disabilities, like agoraphobes or people that are handicapped. He said that's all going to be a thing of the past because of med beds. And he said everybody's going to have to work because our infrastructure is going to be rebuilt. Everything's going to be rebuilt, and we're going to be like just the way we're supposed to be. And he told me that like we're kept in third density on purpose, like artificially. Like we should already be at fifth, but like the negative ETs and stuff like that are keeping us intentionally at third density.
Okay, I gotta ask. I think I'm going to let our next guest know they need to wait. So, one is we've had Kathy O'Brien on the show, who's was a victim of satanic ritual abuse, and she talked about how yes, things that happen to us in our past, it does affect through generations. So I want to ask, do you see where are we right now? I mean, do you see the emergency broadcast system being used? How long do you see this playing out? I mean, it feels like there's so many things happening right now that we're on the verge of some stuff really happening, like that trickle it feels like the dam's about to burst. Is that fair to say?
And he told me about a channel that would be on 24/7. He told me about the 10 days of darkness. He told me about Q. He said it, but it's probably just going to be more like 3 or 4 days. But it's 10 days, like worst case scenario. We're going to go through we're going to have our power turned off because we're going to be given like Tesla power, like unlimited power. He said it's actually not Tesla, but it's a power system that goes directly through, the magnetic field of the Earth. We're going to get all our power just through the magnetic field of the Earth. And he told me that, you're going to be seeing this stuff. You're going to be seeing all these court cases, and you're going to be seeing people executed and the crimes they committed. And I remember he told me about the Clintons, and he told me about the Frazzle Drip tape. And he said, he told me about it, and he said, don't make me tell you, Daryl. Don't make me tell you. He said, I just saw it 5 days ago because he time traveled so much. And he said he got done torturing me, like Aquino forced him to torture me because that's what the reptiles do. If they find out people are close to you, just to see your loyalty or whatever, they'll have them torture you, and if you don't do it, they'll take it out on your children and your family and stuff. So it's like kind of like you have no choice. And he said, but even though for me it was 2 years, for him it was only 3 days or 5 days. 5 days. But he saw the tape 3 days ago, and I said, what was on the tape? And he's like, don't make me tell you. I just saw it. I just saw it. Don't make me tell you. Eventually he broke down and he told me. And he was like gnashing his teeth angry, like clutching his fist and gnashing his teeth. And he said that there's a tape where Hillary Clinton, cuts off this little girl's face and mocks her with it, like holds it in front of her face and kind of like mocks her with her own face. And the little girl is screaming, why are you doing this? Please just kill me, things like that. And causes her great pain and suffering until it eventually kills her. And he said when the world sees this, and it's going to be, he said, when we see this, it's not just going to be the United States. The world is going to demand to see her publicly executed. He said, when you see this, you're going to see your own daughter being killed. And that's how he worded it. And he said, that's how it's going to happen. And he said, there's going to be a major event. But like I said, he kept on saying, like, you have to remember this part. And I don't remember it because it happened decades ago. But he's like, and he looked down my timeline. He's like, nah, I don't remember. But maybe it's coming up soon. But he said there's going to be a major event. And he said we're going to use their holidays against us and things like that. So things like Friday the 13th and Halloween and maybe even April Fools and things like that. These are going to be like big things. That they're using the satanic holidays against the Satanists, what I mean, kind of thing. They're going to use their own mojo against them.
Well, yeah, Mike, it's New Year's Day. It's April 1st right now.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah. If you think about it, yeah. Oh, he said we're going to go back to like is it the Gregorian calendar or something? Like we're going to go back to like a different. Yeah, he told me that too. Isn't that like April 1st? It's like the real calendar. He's like, yeah, we're going to go back to like the original real calendar.
We've heard a lot about solar storms, solar weather impacting the Earth. The potential to create an EMP, a Carrington event, something along those lines. But that incrementally, this is changing our DNA, and that may be part of the process of ascension. But that there's a real uptick in solar weather right now. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. Because like I said, I remember being with like the Nordic people, and they showed me something on the ship, and they had like a ability where you would just see almost like a hologram kind of just appear in front of, like, we were in like a meeting room, like a desk, a meeting area, and almost like a television screen it looked like, but it was like a hologram kind of just appeared, and they all stood up and looked. It almost seemed like a religious event to them. It's something they had to stand up and watch. And it was a star. It was the last world that ascended to a higher density. And the star, it went out. And it went out, I think it's anywhere from, like, I was told 15 minutes to a couple days that this can happen. But the star went out, and it didn't go out very long, but then it kind of spit and sputter, almost like a cold motorcycle or an engine, and then it reignited. And that, I remember that was, I think, a big part of the ascension process. It's like you're your star, your sun. It looks like it appears to die, but then it's like reborn, and then it comes back to life. That's like a big, the star. Like I said, Robert told me that our world is ascended, but our star is artificially being kept at a lower density, and that's why higher density beings live under, in these caverns underground, and that's why our world is already ascended to this higher density, but we're not, because we live on the surface, and our star hasn't ascended yet.
Did he tell you about the Orion group or the Order of the Black Sun?
Well, the Black Sun is what you wore in the Dark Fleet. I remember that big time. They didn't have swastikas and stuff, but they did have like armbands with the Black Sun on it, and that was huge for them. Yeah, like the Dark Fleet was all about the Black Sun. I didn't see really anybody, maybe a swastika or two, but it was almost all Black Sun stuff.
Can you?
But I don't remember.
I was going to say, can you share with the viewers, one of the speeches that you gave, I think it was last month in March of 2023, about the experience you had with, it sounds like there might have been two at this point, but with the Vril and, them, well, go ahead, start with whichever one you want to start with.
Well, when I was being tortured by Aquino, and I'd already seen the kids and things like that in the underground cavern, and I said, you guys are the Jeffrey Dahmer family. The Satanists were in the background, and they had like black cloaks on, and they were kind of like standing against the wall facing each other in the very back, and Aquino was right there, and I was on like a torture rack, and I was being cut up and things like that, sometimes, skinned. They throw me in a healing tank, they do it again. They threw me in a healing tank, they do it again. They just kept on torturing me to the point where I go into shock. And instead of putting me in a med bed, that would have taken too long, maybe an hour or two. They threw me in a healing tank where it would only take a couple minutes. And I remember Robert telling me that that's not good for you going into healing tanks. It kind of takes a piece of, it's only used for emergency. It's only used for like clinical death, like if you're blown in half, things like it's only used in absolute emergency. Same thing with clinical death. That's not really, it kind of takes a part of you that makes you away from you, if that makes sense. But anyways, I said, you guys are like the Dahmer family. Kino spoke up because he was in the army, and Jeffrey Dahmer was in the army. He said, I know what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer. You want to see what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer? And he talked to the warrior cast, the big reptile that put me in the chair. He's a warrior cast, a big one. And he said something to him, and he walked down a hall, and he came back. Look, he had a puppet in his hand. And he sat it down on the ground, and Aquino said, do it. This was the reptile Aquino, the reptile that controlled the body of Michael Aquino. He said, do it. And it did something, and he grabbed something off of it, and he kind of put it on against my face, and it was like, he said, this is what happened to Aquino, he told me. And he was telling me about the droning process and things like that. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that to you, and he threw it away. Later on, this is here where I live in Florida. I was drinking. I had a really bad time when I got in the military because I remember this stuff, and I was basically doing stuff like going in the really bad areas. I didn't have like the nerve to kill myself, so I figured but I was like kind of like on a suicide kind of mission, and I would go into like bad areas and bad neighborhoods and things like that. And there were these two women standing on a porch, and they said, "Come inside, come inside." And I came in, and they were just staring at me. It was really weird. Only the kitchen light was on, and there was no lights in the living room. And I was pretty drunk, and I said, you mind if I lie down on the floor for a moment? I said, no, go ahead. I laid down, and I was kind of like halfway in and halfway out of it kind of way. And I remember I heard like a voice say, like, kind of like, it said, I'm scared. Like it kind of sounded like that, like trembly, really high pitched and trembly. And one of the women said, "Oh, it's all right, it's all right." And all of a sudden, like I felt something cold and wet on my cheek. And then it felt like whenever you rub your eye too much, and your eyes kind of strained. And I felt it slap on my cheek, and I heard a voice in my head say, "Get it out, take it out, pull it out." And it was part of my story. If you go to my website, I go into more detail, but there was like, a Nordic, a Pleiadian. I became really good friends with him. And he was like the navigator, and I was the pilot. And I remember one time I was flying in the ship with him, and he kind of looked down to the ground. He was like saying stuff, like telepathically. He was like, "Get it out, get it out." I didn't know what he was doing, and it turned out at the time, at that present I was at on Earth after I came back from the program, he had such a strong like telepathic bond with me. He realized I was in trouble, and he's a higher density being, and they can do things like that. Like I said, like they're much more spiritually advanced. They can create like almost like a telepathic kind of bond with you. And he realized I was in trouble, and he kind of snapped me out of it long enough, where he said, "Pull it out." I remember I grabbed it, and he said, "Pull it out," and I tried to pull it out, and I could feel my eyeball getting pulled out with it. It was already wrapped around my retinal nerve. And I said, in my head, this was back on Earth, I said, "I'm going to pull my eye out." He said, "Well, then pull your eye out." He's like, "You have to get it out. Pull it out now." So I clenched my eyes together as hard as I could, and I wrapped it around my finger, and I just started pulling it out. And the women, they said, hold him down, these two women. And so I braced, and they held me down, so I braced my arm, and I just pulled it out with all my might, and I got it out. And I pushed them off me, and I stood up, and it was like slapping around in my hand, and I threw it down the hallway. It was cold and wet. And I looked at down, and I just, kind of yelled, like I didn't know what was happening. And they were just on the couch. They jumped up on the couch and were just staring at me. And on the coffee table, I saw it look like a puppet sitting down. And I looked down, and I looked up at them, and I looked down, and it was dark. Like I said, only the kitchen light was on. Everything else was dark. So it was like all I could see was shadows. And I looked down, and I saw this thing that had like, like crab eyes. It had like eye stalks on top of its head with like alligator eyes kind of. And it had the two pinchers, and it was like a rusty brown. And I remember I kind of still remember what happened to me. And I remember the guys talking about the reptiles, the underground bases. And I remember like the Pleiadians called them lizards, almost like an insult. So I yelled out like lizard. And the two women, almost like they had like a shared hive mind, one after another said, he knows, like one after another. And I just, I screamed, and I ran out of the house, and the neighborhood came out to see what was happening. And I said, like this woman came up to me and said, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong?" And I said, "I don't know. There's this reptile thing on this table, and these people were trying to do something to me." And I remember I saw the mailbox in front of their house. It was a white mailbox, and it had polka dots on it. And that was something that Donald Marshall said, that's how drone people distinguish each other, is they'll paint polka dots on their mailbox so they know that they've been droned by one of these real lizards too. So it's like safe to go into a house or ask for help or whatever. It's like a way they communicate. So if you ever see like a mailbox with polka dots on it, and when Robert was like looking down my timeline, he said that that happened to me. He said it was a close call. He's like, the assassination attempt was made on you, and it was a close call. He said a Kino did that. And I said, how? He said higher density beings can manipulate lower densities, so things like that can happen. So he was able to kind of like manipulate that to happen somehow. So, it was like a close call, but it didn't work.
So if someone sees polka dots on a mailbox, it's safe for another drone, but not for another person.
Yeah, it's like a way they communicate with each other.
The hell?
Yeah, and Robert told me that there's like three different kinds of drones. There's the small little gray like worker bee thing that I first saw. That's a drone. Those light brown things, they kind of do preventative maintenance on like reptile ships and stuff like that. They're they're like an organic machine. And then there's like the brill lizards. They're called drones too. And then when somebody's been droned by a brill lizard, they're called drones. And he was telling me that, like, when you see serial killers or people doing crazy stuff on the internet, like cooking puppies alive in a walk and stuff like that, real sadistic stuff, he said those people have been droned, people that do stuff like that.
Like maybe Anthony Fauci and doing stuff to puppies, like stuff like that.
Yeah, like he told me like real sadistic, weird serial killer, cannibal, pedophilia kind of stuff. He's like 9 times out of 10, those people were droned. Like those aren't human beings anymore.
Wow,
that makes sense.
It does make sense, because who would even do that? Wow, this has been fascinating. I mean, we could go on for. I mean, we're about an hour and a half, and I feel like we're just getting started. But
we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, can we have you back?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Of course.
Wonderful. Yeah, this has been amazing.
This has been a phenomenal, wonderful interview, and I hope our guests and to our guests, please comment, please, and Daryl, can you please tell the viewers your website and where to find you, any social media that you might have, etc., please?
Yeah, it's Daryl, Daryl, DarylDJames.com. D is in Delta. And I have all my videos there. I'm working on a book, and I'm going to back to Grafton, Illinois, to do like a small little group commentary on the SSP. Tony Rodriguez will be there, James Rink, and that's for the Journey to Truth guys. That will be in Grafton, Illinois, May 22nd to the 25th. So Grafton, Illinois, yeah, May 22nd to 25th. So I'll be there doing that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, DarylDJames.com. I have a Facebook, just Daryl James. Yeah.
This is, I mean, I'm still in shock. This is you've answered so many amazing questions. What a gift that you've went through this so that people, because you're just this likable guy, just telling it like it is, and like you said, you bop around like your father. you're very easy to talk to. What a treat. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Yeah, it's taking everything in me to stop asking questions.
I know. But
believe me, I have a lot. But
yeah, we'll watch this and have more questions for next time.
Yeah.
But thank you so much and appreciate you. And we'll be in touch. Hang out. We're gonna pause this, but hang out after, and we'll take care, everybody. Thank you so much, and hopefully he blew your minds as well. So.
Hey, audience. Joe and I have a confession to make.
It's true.
Something that we haven't talked to you about, and we feel kind of bad. It's time to let you know. And we should have done it earlier. We have a Patreon account. So if you like what we do and you want to let us know, please visit our Patreon account. It'll be in the link below. And what we're hoping to do for our Patreons, $10 and up, because we're money grubbing truthers. We'd love to get together and have a chat, a Zoom meeting with you personally, at least twice a month. We'll see how it goes. Such a good time. We know we have one of the best audiences out there, and we'd rather talk to you than just about anyone. So let's do this. Right, Joe?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do our first one in April, and we're looking forward to it. We're inspired by the great people in Michael Della Rocca's Patreon chat as well. So
yeah, we went over there. We had a great time. So
we thought we'd do the same. So
we're gonna have a better time.
Yeah,
but it's you guys. It's you guys.
Yeah. At least as good of a time.
Which is probably also those guys, maybe in some cases.
Hopefully.
So
yes.
Yeah.
So we just want to let you know, and thank you so much for watching and enjoying the journey with us, and we're excited about it. So I think that's all we have for now, right?
I think that's it. Also, comment. We'd love to read your comments. And thank you so much for all the positive comments. They're phenomenal. They really keep us going.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.